you use this every day in your life, okay? This is being a reasonable person. That's what conditionals are, okay? If you can be reasonable, if you can think through, like, does this make sense? These don't need to be difficult, okay? Are we not ready for this yet? Why don't you have the notes?
Do you understand the previous system?
Your Canvas won't load? Okay. So conditionals. Listen, you're going to do this over and over and over again. A conditional, like when your parents say under one condition, right? A conditional is an if, then statement. Okay? If this, then this. If you get a GPA of 3.0, then you can play on this team or the school, right? The school says, I don't know what your GPA has to be, but if this, then that. Those are conditional statements, okay? You have to have a 2.0 to play, to be eligible. Okay. So here's how this goes. Here's how this goes. You will get just kind of the generic version of this in letter form because it's just easier to talk through, okay? Rather than have to do this big statement every time. So here's what I want you to see. When you have this, you say if P, then Q, okay? If P, then Q. P is going to be what we call the hypothesis. P will always be the first letter and Q will always be the second. Yeah.
Why is that?
It's just how we represent it. It's like saying... what
do they stand for?
Nothing. They're just placeholders. Treat it like a variable, right? I'm just saying P is going to be the hypothesis of our statement. Q is going to be the conclusion of our statement. So if I said, if the sun is shining...
Then it's the daytime.
Then it's daytime.
Wait, is this Ruben? Is Miss Kim here today?
I don't know. Okay, so here's the thing. This is basically saying, hey, you with me?
Good.
This is basically saying hypothesis. Okay, that's my hypothesis. And then whatever comes after the then is your conclusion. Okay, hypothesis, conclusion, or P and Q. So P will always be hypothesis, Q will always be conclusion. Now notice I did not underline the if and I did not underline the then. Those don't go with them. Okay, it's just whatever comes after it because we're going to get to a point where we can switch them and we could say if it's daytime, then the sun is shining. Okay. Now notice this is not a true statement, right? If the sun is shining, then it's daytime. That's not true because in Alaska, the sun shines for nearly 24 hours at certain times of years and it's nighttime, but the sun is shining, right? So you will have conditional statements that are not true. Hey, you don't get to talk about Alaska right now. Focus for me. I can talk about Alaska. You don't get to go off on a tangent about Alaska. That's what I'm saying. All right. So take a look at this. Okay. I'm actually not even going to talk to you about the Venn diagram. You can just ignore that. Example 1.
Cross out the Venn diagram.
Yes. Says what are the hypothesis and conclusion? Underline the hypothesis once and the conclusion twice. Okay. So if you look at this first example, if an animal is a robin, then it is a bird. What is your hypothesis?
If an animal is a robin.
Close. What do we not include?
An animal is a robin.
An animal is a robin. So you're going to go underline once here. No if. Okay? Don't underline the if. What is the conclusion?
It is a bird.
It is a bird. No then. Okay? Okay, so underline the second one. If the sun is shining, then I'm going swimming. What's the hypothesis? One underline. The sun is shining. Then I'm going swimming. What's the conclusion?
I'm going swimming.
I'm going swimming. Okay. Okay, how about this? If I said, I'll go to ice cream if you pay. Okay, I'll go to ice cream if you pay. This is kind of a trick question. What's the hypothesis?
You pay.
Oh.
You pay, right? Hypothesis, excuse me. Hey, Cadence, move here. You two keep chatting. Move over. You pay is your hypothesis, right? So we switched them. I'll go to ice cream is your conclusion. If you pay, then I'll go to ice cream, right? So they flipped places because it's whatever comes after your if that is your hypothesis. It's whatever comes after your then that is your conclusion. Now, this is an assumed then, right? It's not actually there, but we assume if you pay, then I'll go to ice cream. Okay, so just be careful with that.
They're like 41 minutes.
Yeah.
Dude, that's crazy.
Okay, so example 2, it says write a conditional. What is a conditional?
That's a good question.
What's a conditional?
A condition.
It's the very top of your notes. An if then. So write an if then statement from this, okay? And these can be a little bit tricky because you usually have to add in kind of a subject to what we're talking about. So this first one, it says vertical angles share a vertex, okay? So we're going to say something like this. How many angles do you need to be vertical angles? Do you remember vertical angles?
No.
These two are vertical angles. So 2 angles, right? So we're going to say if 2 angles are vertical angles, what do you think comes next?
Then it shares a vertex.
Then they share a vertex. Okay, so you're making it an if-then statement. If 2 angles are vertical angles, then they share a vertex. So see if you can come up with the next one then. It says dolphins are mammals. How can you turn that into an if-then statement? Remember, you need to kind of add a subject to
If
it.
it is a dolphin, they are a mammal.
Okay, so what's it? If it is a dolphin, give it a more specific something. If what
If an
is a dolphin?
animal
If an
is a
animal,
dolphin,
yes.
Then it is a mammal.
If an animal is a dolphin,
Are humans mammals?
yes, then it is
Yeah, that was pretty dumb for it.
a mammal.
Sorry, guys.
That was really not kind, Forrest.
That is true. We all
Guys, we have to practice now to this one.
Okay, so I said this earlier. These aren't always true statements. If the sun is shining, then it's daytime. That's not true, right? So you're going to have to determine if something is true or if it's false. And if it's false, come up with what's called a counterexample. We've talked about counterexamples, okay? So take a look at this. For truth value, okay, we're saying what is the truth value of some statement? In other words, is it true or is it false? Okay? If you have a hypothesis that is true and the conclusion is true, then your conditional is true. But if you have a hypothesis that's true, remember that's the P, right? So if P, then Q. If P, then Q. If your hypothesis is true, but then the conclusion they make from that is false, then your conditional is false. Okay? So true is a true statement. True false is a false statement. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. Well, I'll show you an example and I think it'll make a lot more sense. Any idea how many counterexamples you would need to be able to say that's a false statement?
1.
You only need one. Once you prove it false, it is false, okay? So you only need one counterexample to be able to prove a conditional false.
I love writing the letter.
And the counterexample, like we said before, makes the hypothesis true, but the conclusion false. Okay, so let's take a look at this. And yes, think about what I just told you, but also just think about reasonably speaking. Does this make sense? Okay. If a woman is French, then she is European. Is that true?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes. Where is France?
In Europe.
In Europe. So if someone is French, then she is European, right? That is true.
Mr. Gardner, yes, Mr. Gardner.
Oh yeah, Mr. Gardner.
To be honest, okay, what if it's a question where I just like don't know? Like
If
I
you
almost
legitimately
feel
don't, well, I'm not going to do a lot of geography with this, but if you legitimately don't know something, I can clarify. And then you'll be able to.
Actors, I feel like I know a lot about that stuff.
Oh, actors? No, I know none of that.
This Captain America.
like the one that was on like Pisces, Aquarius stuff. Like, I'm not
Yeah,
a-
that's
I'm not
why I
one of those
didn't
star
put that
sign
one on
girls.
there,
Not even
right?
star
Because
signs,
that's
zodiac
junk.
signs.
Okay, so look at this one. If a number is divisible, hey, if a number is divisible by 3, so that's hypothesis, that would have to be true, right? Then it is odd. So in order for these to both be true, we have to be able to come up with no counterexample, okay? Can you find a counterexample? 12. 12 is a number that is divisible
And 24.
by 3,
48.
but 12 is not odd, right? So true,
And
12
96.
is divisible by 3, but false that it's an odd number, okay?
And
So your
182.
counter example could be any number that's divisible by 3, 12, 24,
182.
no,
Yeah.
is not divisible by 3.
Yes, it is.
No,
Yeah, it is.
182 divided by 3,
It is divisible.
3 goes into that 6 times, which is 18.
Oh, no, it doesn't.
3 doesn't go into 2. So you'd have a remainder. It's actually 60 and 2/3.
So what about 96?
96 would be a counterexample.
No,
If it's
182
false,
shouldn't work.
you give one
Because he
example
times
where it would be false.
96.
Yeah.
Wait, you.
Forrest, I think it's best to just stop.
Wait.
Okay,
96
um,
No, wait.
This, guys,
Oh, it's
hey,
192.
this is probably the part that you'll do the most with. And it's probably the hardest part, just because there's a lot of like moving things around and changing signs. So focus for me right now, because this can be a little tricky. There is what's called a negation of a statement. What do you hear when you hear the word negation? Or what does it make you think? Negative, okay? A negation, if you think of numbers, right? A positive number, a negative is the opposite, right? So a negation
I said
is the opposite of a statement, okay? So in other words, if I said the sky is blue, and I wanted to come up with the negation of that statement, the opposite of that statement. Anyone want to try?
So the negation is just the or like the argument, like the opposite.
The opposite. What would be the opposite of the sky is blue?
The sky is black.
Is that opposite though? That covers one thing that it is not.
Right? The sky is, there is no sky.
What would cover everything else?
It's cloudy.
The sky is blue.
The sky is cloudy.
The sky is not blue, right?
Oh.
Negation, all you have to do with this, hey, excuse me,
This is not.
Guys,
you either put in
I love Rocco.
I miss Rocco.
not
Hashtag
Free Rocco.
Free Rocco.
or take out
Was getting considered.
not.
He gave me a
Okay.
photo of that.
Hashtag
Hey,
wanted
zip it. Excuse me, Forrest, with me. You? With me.
He's like, I want this, you know?
So put it in or take it out, okay? If I say the sky is blue, the negation would be the sky is not blue. Okay? What if I said
But this guy is.
No, on cloudy days,
the board is not white? What's the negation of that?
The board is.
The board is white, okay? So usually, not every time, but most of the time you put in the word not or you take out the word not, okay? Okay, so here's where it gets a little bit fancy. You have 4 types of statements. you have your conditional, which is if P, then Q. Okay? Then there's what's called a converse of the conditional. And all you do is you take your P and
I'm
Q
wearing Converse right now.
and you switch them.
I
Forrest,
think my sister's thoughts.
stop distracting everyone from what I'm. Yes, you are. We don't need to know that you're wearing Converse right now. We need you to be quiet and listen to what we're doing.
I think that's
Okay,
kind of funny that
listen.
you tell them that.
If P, then Q, right? Your if and your then. The converse says if Q, then P. So you just switch the place of your hypothesis and your conclusion. If Q, then P. So the converse is if Q, then P. I'm going to write them here. If P, then Q. This becomes if Q, then P. Okay? The inverse and the contrapositive negate things. What does it mean to negate? A negation is the opposite, right? So here's how you write this. If not P, then not Q. Okay, and then the contrapositive switches it back again. If not Q, then not P. Okay, so here's what I tell people. I will never try to trick you. I will always put them in this order. Okay, conditional, converse, inverse, contrapositive. It's like a little dance, right? You're here, if P then Q, if Q then P, if not P then not Q, if not Q then not P. It is going to go back and forth every time. So I don't know how you want to represent that, but it's just going to keep switching places. Do your little dance, okay? If P then Q, if not Q then not P, or not if, wow, if P then Q, if Q then P, if not P then not Q, if not Q then not P. So let me just show you in this example what this looks like. This first one says, if A, I'm gonna make you both leave my room. You're being so annoying right now. Stop it. This one says, if A is 15, then A is acute. Okay, the converse would be, switch them. If A is acute, then A is 15, right? So they just took the hypothesis and conclusion and put them in the opposite spot. The next one's gonna bring them back to their original spot, but negate them both. So if A is not 15, then A is not acute. And then it's going to flip it back again. If A is not acute, then A is not 15. So if P then Q, if Q then P, not P then not Q, not Q then not P. It just zigzags back and forth. Okay? Let's try it. So if my conditional statement says, if a figure is a square, then the figure is a quadrilateral. Okay, now think about that. If a figure is a square, so here's a square, is that a quadrilateral?
Yes.
Yes. So the truth value is that is true. Okay, let's find the converse. So the conditional was if P then Q. Do you remember what the converse is in terms of P and Q? If Q. Yes, so just switch them around. If a figure is a quadrilateral, if you want to just copy and paste each section, you're welcome to do that. If a figure is a quadrilateral, then the figure is a square. Okay, now think about that. If the figure is a quadrilateral, then the figure is a square. Is that true?
I don't know what a quadrilateral is.
Quadrilateral is just a figure that has four sides.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Oh.
That's not true, right? That is false. And then all you need to do is draw me a picture. What could you draw me?
A rectangle.
A rectangle. You could draw this, right? That is a quadrilateral, but it is not a square. We want this to be true. We want this to be false. What thing? Trapezoid?
Well, like the bottom is shorter, and then the sides go outwards.
Like an ice cream.
Yeah, like that thing.
Trapezoid.
Okay.
Oh.
Or you could do
I love
a rhombus or parallelogram, okay? You only need one, right? You only need one counterexample for this to work.
2 examples. Could I I draw like a traffic
Sure,
light as well?
yes, you could draw both. Okay, so that's if Q then P. The inverse says if not P, then not Q. So how do we write that?
If it is not a square. then
Yes.
it's not a quadrant. That's true.
If a figure is not a square, then it's not a quadrilateral. If a figure's not a square, then it's not a quadrilateral. Think about that. Something that's not a square, could it still be a quadrilateral? Yes, right? Any of those examples we just drew, a rectangle, a trapezoid, those are quadrilaterals, but they're not squares. Okay, so that is false again. Okay, and then what's your contrapositive? If not Q, then not P. What would that say? If a figure is what? So go back up here and just swap them again.
It's
If a
not
figure
a
is not a quadrilateral,
It's not a square.
right, then it's not a square.
I like squares.
Okay, now think about that.
Do you like squares?
If a figure doesn't have four sides, can it be a square? If a figure is not a quadrilateral, then it's not a square. True or false?
False. True.
That's true. Okay, now let me show you a little trick. In terms of truth value with these, your conditional and your contrapositive will always be the same truth value. Okay, so if your conditional was true, then your contrapositive has to be true. If your conditional was false, then your contrapositive has to be false. Okay, the same is true about the converse and the inverse. These two will always have the same truth value also. Okay, so that's really helpful because when you go to check something, it's usually pretty easy to tell if a conditional is true, but sometimes the wording gets a little tricky for the contrapositive. So if you knew your conditional was false, you don't even have to think about it. The contrapositive will be false. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's either going to go true, false, false, true, false, true, true, false. All of them will be true, or all of them will be false. Okay, you cannot go true, false, and you cannot go false, true, true. Okay. Questions on that?
Sure. Do you think you're gonna remember them?
Okay.